The first of the 4 steps is to set the stage. With any presentation, and perhaps especially with recorded presentations, the first few minutes may be the most important. It's in these first few minutes that you gain attention, establish a connection, and begin to foster the engagement necessary for learners to act on the knowledge and skills you'll share.
So using this time wisely is one of the best ways to ensure the overall success of your presentation. There are many ways to approach it, but successfully setting the stage usually requires a presenter to do 3 things: excite interest, connect personally, and ask for participation.
We tried our best to model those elements of setting the stage in our own opening to this course. So let's back up, examine what we did, and suggest some other approaches you might try. We all have a limited amount of cognitive space to use to engage with and process new information and ideas. That space, typically referred to as working memory, can only hold a few items at any one time. When we ask for a learner's attention, we're asking for space in her working memory. Given the amount of distraction most of us juggle on a day-to-day basis, that can be no small ask. Even if we've set aside time to participate in an educational experience, we still have any number of things on our mind, and the pull of multitasking can be strong. To support learning, we have to gain the learner's attention, and then critically, we also have to focus and maintain it. We have to excite interest in whatever it was that captured attention. We need to make and maintain a cognitive connection. So how do you do that? One approach that can be very effective is to introduce a challenge or a problem that is relevant to the topic at hand. Our brains are such that when we're presented with a challenge, it's very difficult not to feel at least some level of curiosity about how the problem might be addressed. That, you probably realize, is the approach we took at the beginning of this course by presenting 2 learning challenges and asking you to engage with them. Effective learning is a central focus of this course, and presumably one that all participants in this course are interested in supporting, so highlighting a couple of learning challenges and how to tackle them made sense. That's one approach, but it's certainly not the only one. What are some other practical approaches to exciting interest? A personal story, or one taken from headlines, can often do the trick. So can a thought-provoking question, a quote from a well-known thinker or practitioner, or a compelling image. All of these are ways to gain learners' attention and begin to get them mentally focused on and interested in what you'll cover. The challenge for you as a presenter is to leverage whatever approach you take to focus attention to what is most salient for the course. Getting and then not squandering attention is a cardinal rule. Take a moment to think about a presentation you're working on now. How might you gain learners' attention at the opening? It might be through a personal story, a news story, a quote, an image, a problem, a challenge, or some other approach that ties to the knowledge and skills you'll cover. Pause this presentation now to give yourself time to jot down 1 or more ideas for how you might gain attention.
Once we've excited interest, our goal is to extend and deepen interest by making the cognitive connection even stronger. The key to achieving this goal is to make the material as personally relevant as possible to the learner. That begins with choosing an initial focus of attention that is meaningful in relation to the topic of your presentation. So you shouldn't start with just a random challenge or a story that doesn't tie to the learning outcomes you aim to support. In our case, we made some subtle choices that nonetheless had the potential for significant impact. For example, we identified you as a learner, and then through the 2 challenges we presented, centered on your learning, not necessarily our teaching. We also introduced an element of tension, even frustration, problems that needed to be resolved, but that, at least at first, did not seem readily solvable. We then helped you achieve a sense of resolution. And this added an implicit emotional element to the material, and there's a wealth of research supporting the connection between emotion, learning, and memory. Of course, we could have taken things further and been a bit more explicit. We might, for example, have asked you to reflect on a time in your own teaching or learning when you felt the content wasn't presented in the most effective manner, when it might have benefited from being presented somewhat differently. In fact, we'll ask you to do just that right now. Take a moment to think of a time in your own teaching or learning when you felt the content wasn't presented in the most effective manner and when it might have benefited from being presented differently. Pause the presentation to give yourself time to think. That sort of reflection is, of course, another way to create a personal connection for the learner. Prompt the learner to connect the material back to her own personal experience. There are, of course, many other techniques that can be used for making a personal connection, and we'll discuss more of them as we go along because they can and should be used throughout a presentation. Your overall goal is to help a learner see the potential application of the material you present to their own life and work. This is the classic what's in it for me or WIFM aspect of adult learning, which taps into a learner's emotions and once again helps to gain focus and attention. You want a learner to stick around to realize the value that your presentation promises.
Finally, one of the most important goals of setting the stage effectively is to secure a commitment from learners to actively participate in the learning experience. This can seem a bit counterintuitive in the case of a recorded presentation as opposed to a classroom-based session, but we'd argue it's equally, if not more important, in a self-paced, on-demand context. Learning does not happen through passively sitting and watching. Active participation is required. An obvious way we asked for participation in our opening was to ask you to engage with the problems we presented. We recognize the degree of engagement will vary from learner to learner, but it's practically impossible not to engage at some level, even if only subconsciously, when presented with a problem or challenge. It's a bit like asking someone not to think of an elephant. In addition to asking you to engage with the challenges we presented, we explicitly asked you to commit to participating in the remainder of the course as we wrapped up our Setting the Stage segment. This is a reasonable request in the context of any course or presentation, and again, it's difficult for a learner not to agree to it, even if only subconsciously. Providing opportunities for participation and commitment early in the course are good learning practices because they help establish cognitive connection and promote doing, which is one of the surest ways to make learning stick. But they also influence how a learner will engage with the remainder of the experience. A significant body of research on the psychology of influence suggests we all have an innate desire to appear consistent with our previous actions. Once we've agreed to do something, it's often hard to say no when the stakes are raised. This is one reason for the popular notion in the world of marketing and sales that the easiest sales are to existing customers. These people have already made a commitment to buy in the past. Turning you down in the future has a way of drawing their past actions into question, something most of us like to avoid. The same applies to learning situations. Once a learner has committed, even unconsciously, to participate in a learning experience, he is more likely to continue participating throughout the experience.
To recap, effectively setting the stage for a learning experience means you should do three things. Excite interest, engage the learner cognitively, gaining attention and exciting interest. Connect personally, establish a personal connection by strengthening the cognitive element and adding an emotional dimension. Ask for participation. Prime for engagement by asking for specific behavior. Get the learner to do something, even if the something is only in their own mind.
Obviously, all of this requires some thought and planning, but it is entirely doable and the time to do it well invested.
By setting the stage effectively, you'll be setting your presentation and your learners up for success.